Let's talk all about AI in business. It's hosted by Brent Muller. Welcome to the Future Proof Podcast.
Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of the Future Proof Podcast. I'm your host, Brent Muller. My guest today, I'm really excited to have Tony Scott from Intrusion.com. Tony, welcome.
Hi, good to be here.
So Tony, for all the viewers out there, just can you kind of introduce yourself, tell a little bit about your background and how you got from Intrusion, because you have a very extensive and very cool background.
Sure. Yeah. I'll try to make it short. When you're as old as I am, it's hard to make it short. So I've been at Intrusion about a little over 3 years. And prior to that, I was with a partner of mine. We were investing in early stage cybersecurity companies and novel technologies. Let's just put it that way. In 2017, I left the last job I had, which was Federal CIO for the U.S. government, the last 2 years of the Obama administration. And I was there literally the last 2 years. Lots of stories about that role and some of the challenges. And then prior to that,
Can't even imagine, by the way.
Yeah.
We could do a whole podcast on that.
Yeah, no, it's a thing all unique unto itself, way different than any other roles. And then before that, in kind of reverse order, I was CIO at VMware, CIO at Microsoft for about 5.5 years, CIO at the Walt Disney Company in Southern California for its global enterprise, and then CTO at General Motors for about 5.5 years before that. And then before that, I had a bunch of roles in senior IT roles, Price Waterhouse, Bristol Myers Squibb, and so on. Started my career at Sun Microsystems back in the Spark days and when Sun was really taking off. So, and then along the way have been on, involved in a bunch of startups as either a board member or, founder, what have you. But it's been a fun ride and I'm not done yet. Let's put it that way.
I love that. And you shouldn't be. I mean, with that background, it's crazy. So Tony, when we talked before, you just have so many really cool stories. And one of the ones that comes to mind for me was when you walked the shop floor at Sun. And I'd love for you to tell a story, because a good friend of mine, George Moore, is a CTO. He's been a CTO at a bunch of companies. He's got a similar background, not as diverse as yours, but very similar. He did something similar, and it just sparked what I think is such a neat thing that you did.
Yeah. So the background is I'm just gotten hired at Sun Microsystems. I was hired by a guy who on my first day said, I got a promotion and I'm going into a completely different role. Come meet your new boss and we have a new thing for you to do. And the new thing turned out to be developing software for our shop floor, our board test facility, as it turned out. And they walked me into a completely empty warehouse. The walls were up, the lights were on, and there was heat in the building. But other than that, it's just a giant empty factory floor. And I learned that day that my job was to take all the software that had been written for shop floor controls and management and get it ported over to the Sun platform. The state of the art at that time was digital equipment and IBM and other platforms.
I was just going to say, was there anything not on IBM back then?
Yeah,
wow.
Well, it was digital actually had a pretty impressive set of software, but Scott McNeely, our CEO, had told the world, we're going to run Sun on Sun. And so that became my mandate. And I had never done anything like that before, but one of the things that I had realized was that it's important to view the world through the user's eyes. And so I went immediately to another factory floor that we were already running. This one was on Digital Equipment Corp software and a smattering of other kinds of things. And I asked to spend a day with this plant manager and walk the floor and have him verbalize for me what he was looking at and how he thought about managing a big complex warehouse like this. And it was probably one of the most valuable things that I ever did because, typically what happens when you develop software is, especially if you're porting it from other platforms, is you try to make it look exactly like the thing that they're used to. And so I asked him a lot of questions about what he liked and what he didn't like and what things weren't in the software that he, used to manage the shop floor. And it turned out there were a bunch of visual things that he could see with his own eyes that were going on in the shop floor, but weren't really represented, in the software or in the reports or any of the other stuff. So anyhow, long story short, we ended up porting some things over, but developing a bunch of stuff that was novel and unique. And we opened that shop floor on schedule, and it was a pretty cathartic experience for me because, it was all brand new stuff, and not only that, it had to work.
Right.
That was also paramount in our calculations is, how can we ensure that this stuff is going to be highly reliable and work all the time for a plant that was going to run 24/7, 300
And
days.
it probably became a lighthouse story, right? To be able to tell about Sun running on Sun.
It did, and we got a lot of traction. But the other interesting thing that happened was a few years later, it became apparent that most companies like Sun were outsourcing a lot of the, building the boards and testing the boards and everything but final assembly. And so while I think we did a really good job on that, the whole concept became obsolete within 4 or 5 years,
Yeah.
So,
Technology moves fast.
it does. And, it became apparent that you could, do this in a much more efficient way somewhere else other than doing it yourself. So, but, it also told me that things are going to constantly change, and don't fall in love with something you did yesterday because, it might change tomorrow.
Absolutely. So I know you had so many good stories. We talked about, I think, a couple on our last call, the Disney story, the Microsoft story, really interesting. And obviously I'm sure you have some at Intrusion. So if you, I would love to hear a couple more.
Well, I think if there's a common theme through my experience, it is something we just talked about, which is change is constant. And I think a lot of organizations can either be hampered by their technology environment, or you can, play even, or you can try to get ahead of the game if you can figure out where things are going. And in each of the cases of, Disney and Microsoft and even General Motors, I was fortunate enough to work with a team that was pretty focused on where the ball is going, not where it is today. And so,
which is a huge thing. Not every company does that. Yeah.
Well, and especially in these large companies, change doesn't happen overnight. I mean, it's got to happen, but, there's a bunch of people.
Like turning a big ship, right? That's what I always hear. Is that?
So at Disney, for example, we could see that while we were making tons of money selling DVDs of Disney TV shows and Disney movies and all the rest of it, this new thing that we were doing, streaming, was probably going to be the moneymaker of the future. And that selling DVDs and the traditional ways that we had made money, especially in the media and entertainment side, was going to change rapidly. So it meant that we had to change all of our internal systems to be future focused, not focused on the business we had been in. Same thing at Microsoft. We used to sell Microsoft Office on, CD-ROMs and,
I remember those days.
Physical things, right? You'd go to Best Buy and buy your thing. And we could see that, digital download was going to be the wave of the future. And boy, you got to get ready for that well in advance of, the time when it's obvious and apparent that that's what you need to do. And I'll close with General Motors. The probably the most transformational thing I ever saw in business was when I started in 99, we were moving off of having EDS manage a lot of our internal systems. And there was a mandate that we figure out how to make cars faster, meaning from the design or concept stage to the point where you could actually make one and it would roll off the factory floor. So when this team that I worked with started, the state of the art, the fastest anybody in the industry was doing it was around 5 years. So you tell me what fashion's going to be in 5 years and I'll pay you a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
And so what you get when you have that lengthy of a design process is you get a lot of uninteresting stuff, because you're hedging your bets. You're not being fashion forward. You're kind of, trying to follow as best you can, but 5 years out. And so we set an internal goal of being able to do that in 18 months. And at 18 months, you can be a player in that space. And so that's what our team did, is we, over the course of the next 2 or 3 years, we were able to transform every aspect of the concept to design to engineering to manufacturing engineering to the point where you could have a car, come off the end of a assembly line in 18 months. And
it's a monumental leap if you think about it.
Well, it was tremendous. And then the other interesting part is, because a lot of this was digitizing every single aspect of that process, we discovered that quality also went way up. So the first,
really?
Yeah, because you weren't subject to these manual translation errors that had been part of the prior process. You didn't have concept guys taking drawings and then handing paper over to the next guys who then tried to figure out what did these guys draw and what were they intending to do. And then, on and on down the line where everybody's shuffling paper to the next set of guys. Now you had a continuous stream of digital data through the whole process. And you could also see upstream too. So the manufacturing engineering guys could see, oh, I see what they're wanting us to build well ahead of the time when it...
Almost like a feedback loop, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So just tremendous benefits. And, that was probably the largest scale transition I've ever seen, in
it's massive.
Industry. Yeah.
Especially in that industry, right? Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Fun to be a part of. Yeah.
So that's an interesting thing. So the quality went way up, right? So now if I kind of extrapolate and look forward, I start to think about how automation and then layering AI on top of that, how quality can go up while increasing speed. Do you see it that way?
Oh, I think it applies in a bunch of different industries. I mean, think about healthcare, for example.
Kind of where I was going, right? With your Bristol-Myers background and Yeah,
it's, there's a bunch of industries that just can benefit from, a higher quality end-to-end sort of digital process, and AI will help because it'll automate some of those tasks, but it can also catch errors that maybe humans wouldn't spot right away or other things. It's I think applicable to a whole wide set of industries for sure.
For sure. So let's circle back for a second, because with all of that breadth of experience that you've had, right, across these industries, and now you get into what is the fear side a little bit of protecting it all, right, and cyber. So talk to us a little bit about Intrusion and kind of your mission there and what you're seeing on that side of it. Because I will tell you, any tech CTO, CEO, founder is worried about this thing that you're about to talk about.
Sure. Well, if you look at any enterprise or any institution of any kind, you've probably invested pretty heavily in a whole set of cybersecurity technologies. Firewalls, intrusion detection prevention, DLP systems. I mean, the list can go on and on. Endpoints, you could spend a couple hours just naming all the solutions.
Absolutely.
And I would say I'm not a critic of those things. I think they're all super necessary and for the most part work pretty well. But there's a problem, which is, I think, largely unaddressed, which is at the end of the day, once all of those technologies are in place, in order to do business, you still have to have traffic coming in from the internet or whoever you're connected to. And you're also sending, information out, data and so on.
Absolutely.
And there's really no technology that's sort of independent of firewalls and all the other technology that you might have in place that's looking at that stream of information and saying, I wonder if this is good or, not so good or really bad. And I'll just take the case of firewalls, and this is not an indictment of firewalls, but by design, they're meant to let a lot of things in.
Right.
And by design, they're meant to let most things go out. Well, any CIO with any experience today knows that there's a bazillion different ways that devices in your network can get infected. It doesn't even have to come in from the outside through the network. It can be an employee bringing an infected device in and hooking it up. It could be a supplier. Heck, you might even be buying technology that has malware embedded in it from the manufacturer.
Don't even know it, right?
Yeah. And so what Intrusion does is we're independent of all those other technologies, and we just look at what's coming in and getting through all the other things that you have in place and what's going out. And we have the world's largest database of reputation on the internet. It's bigger than Google's or anybody else's. And we have this rich history of the internet, of who talks to who and what's behind the IP address and domain names that we're all familiar with. And just as proof of our technology, we do a very quick proof of concept with anybody who will let us do it. We put our technology in, usually right behind their firewall. We let it run for a week. And then we show the customer the report of here's what's going in and here's what's going out. And here's where it's going to, and here's the stuff that we think you might be concerned about. And 100% of the time, the customers, their eyes go, oh my gosh, I had no idea. And part of it is because for most institutions, they haven't had a significant cybersecurity incident on the one hand, but they also don't have any visibility of what of their data is leaking out to the dark web or other places. And I guess the other bad news in some ways is the bad guys keep investing in ways of getting by and
Circumventing, right?
circumventing the technologies that exist. So, and they're, they only have to be right once.
Exactly. Right. And there's no repercussions, right, of them just try. They're the the best at testing, right? They just keep testing, until one gets through. Right?
Keep knocking on the door until, somebody answers. I'll say that, one of the questions I used to get a lot when I was CIO is, what keeps you up at night? What do you worry about? And you would have expected me to say, cybersecurity things or whatever. But when I reflect back on my career and the things that actually got me up at night, the vast majority of them were misconfiguration kinds of things, where somebody, usually in my team, fat fingered a setting on a device or on a server or
happens all the time.
Thought about doing something but got distracted and ended up doing something else. And those human errors, or it might even be a software error in some cases, cause, massive disruption. So one of the things that we didn't design our technology to do, but turns out it's pretty good at catching abnormal behavior apart from the norm. So if somebody does fat finger something and now traffic is coming in that didn't used to come in before, right, and may have some bad stuff in it, it usually does. We're there as kind of this independent, last line of resort, if you will, to say, hey, by the way, something goofy's going on. You better take a look at it.
Fantastic.
And then probably our greatest strength, if I were to summarize, is also on the outbound side. So there's not a lot of technology focused on what's leaving the enterprise and going out through the firewall. There's some DLP technologies that look for, are you leaking IP, or are you leaking social security numbers or
Right.
designs or whatever, but they tend to be pretty specific. What they don't tend to catch is the call homes that malware tends to want to do. So if you get an infected thing, after a while it wakes up and it says, I'm going to call home to Papa wherever in the world that is. Could be North Korea or Iran or China or whatever.
Russia. Yeah, exactly.
And here I am. What do you want me to do? And it might only be a few packets. It could be a very small message that usually the other technologies just ignore because it's kind of, a needle in a haystack kind of thing. And we're really good at catching those kinds of things that are really the precursors to an attack that might come later. And we just block them. We just don't allow those things to occur.
That's
So that's
really interesting.
That's our technology. We're a fairly narrowly focused set of technologies. We don't claim to be a firewall or DLP or any of the other things, but we think we're pretty good at this sort of thin but very important line of defense when everything else has been circumvented.
Really cool, Tony. Really cool. I didn't know that existed. This is exactly why I love doing the podcast. So as you look ahead, what do you see coming down the road, right? The next 1 to 2 years especially with the AI, which makes in your case, the bad actors get more powerful. Cause I always say, as part of my theme on the podcast, is that AI makes people that are good at what they do 10 plus X better because they're like your digital coworkers or assistants, right? So now, but in this case that we're talking about, right, some of the examples you used, it can make the bad actors 10X better, right? So on this side, we got to get 10X better on defense. How do you see that landscape changing?
Well, I think everybody's going to incorporate AI into their platforms, as we have. And the benefits that we've seen already are just better use of humans. So we can use AI to do a lot of the mundane things that used to be laborious tasks for, threat analysts and people who, imagine a world, let's say you're the fire department and everybody in your town is pulling the fire alarm at the same time.
Right.
Constantly, right?
Right.
It would just drive you crazy. Well, that's kind of the equivalent of what we have had in cybersecurity. Alarms are going off constantly all the time. And some of them are for very minor things, and some of them are for really important things like the whole town is actually burning. We need to do something.
Right.
And so AI can really help sort through the, what's real and what's important now and what, can be looked at later. And in our case, because we have this rich history that goes back literally to the beginning of the internet, it can help us figure out, have we seen something like this before? What did it do before? Who was behind it before? What remediation things are best done to protect against that thing? And what we've seen in our brothers and sisters in the cybersecurity world is they tend to throw away a lot of the history that's not, the last 18 months or 2 years or, some fairly recent time frame. And we think that's not a great idea because it turns out there's a lot of old technology out there.
Yeah.
That has lots of vulnerabilities in it that if you have this institutional memory that we do, you can catch a lot of things that others may have forgotten about or never known about in the first place. So that's also a strength of the Intrusion platform.
I love it. Yeah, fantastic. Any thoughts you have for other founders and CEOs as they're trying to figure out how to protect their IP? Because one of the things that comes up, Tony, all the time with us, because we install, like our company installs AI systems and internal brains and that kind of stuff for the company, internal use, growth systems, all that kind of stuff. And the biggest question we get is, hey, how do I make sure that my IP is protected? How do I make sure that I'm secure? And how do I make sure that I'm not, opened up and for exactly some of the stuff you talked about? How would you, or what advice would you give to others? Because it's coming, whether it's my company, any other company that does this, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's a couple of things, and this is kind of a management principle generally, but you get what you inspect. You've probably heard that phrase
Like that saying. Yeah.
over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And
One of the tried and true ones. Yeah.
Yeah. But it applies to digital, I think, as much as anything else, right? If you're not looking at your network traffic under a microscope and seeing what's really going on, you're probably missing a bunch of things that you might care about. So, and I think it's true of endpoints or, any of the other technologies, but you got to think about, what am I inspecting? What am I looking at? Or what am I overlooking in some cases that might, be a source of issues in the long run. When high school, I used to work at Marshall Fields in Chicago, and for a Christmas season, they got me involved with the theft prevention team. And I remember this crusty old guy that I worked with, he said, nobody tries to steal anything into the store. Everybody's trying to shoplift something out of the store. So
makes a lot of sense.
We should be paying attention to the people that are walking out the door more than we're paying attention to the people coming in the door. And I thought, that's certainly the voice of experience, but it applies to a lot of things. And that's, part of the reason we do what we do is what's trying to go out the door that nobody else is really looking at very carefully.
Yeah. It makes total sense. It's funny. I was at Lowe's a couple of weeks ago, and there wasn't a ton of people when I went. And the lady that was at the self-checkouts, right?
Yeah.
She said the same. She said, you would not believe at least 30 attempts a day through her lane of people trying to get to. And I said, you have to be kidding me. And she's like, it's just the nature of this. And so to your point, it's the people walking out the door. And I would not have thought of that and wouldn't have thought of it twice. So you're exactly right. And the scale at which we're talking about with companies and their data going out the door, even if it's leaking little bits, if it's important data, it's really, really crucial that they look at that.
Yeah. Yeah. And some of it just comes from misconfiguration. We had one client who had a breach. We got involved and put our technology in, and within a week or so discovered that their backup servers were sending 2 copies of their backups, one to the place where they wanted it to go, and one to a place where they really didn't want it to go. And to the people running the backup server, it looked like both were legitimate. There was but somebody fat-fingered something, and it was going off someplace that they didn't, and nobody would have known, but for looking at that outbound traffic. And, our analyst said to them, this is a little weird. How come you got 2 different places where you're sending your backups? Is this for redundancy purposes or?
Yeah.
And the guy,
it seems like overkill.
His face just flushed, it was like, really? But nobody would have known.
The number of stories that we probably could talk through, instances like that and worse, in my career going through, as a consultant, some of the stories I've heard where, production systems on a server under some guy's desk.
Sure.
And they went to do a complete office move, data center move, and they couldn't find this one system. It was under his desk. And not in one of the data center, it was like one of just a satellite. And they're like, wait a minute, this is a mission critical production system running under somebody's desk. Stories like that, Tony, all the time, right?
Yeah.
And I guarantee you have way more than I do. So that's just crazy. And we're going to have you back for data and privacy issues, because we could do a whole hour on that. But as I told you, I wanted to close with a couple questions. So one, what's something really cool that Tony Scott himself has done with AI, ChatGPT, any of it, right? For either personal or just some pet project you're doing or something cool you've done as the CEO?
So it's been a few years since I actually wrote any code.
Mm-hmm.
But I heard a lot from our development team about how they were leveraging various AI tools to write code, and they were pretty pleased with it and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, well, this might be a fun thing to do. So one weekend I sat down and I used AI to write a little piece of code for something I was interested in. And I was pretty impressed, to be honest with you. It did a way better job than I ever did as a programmer way back in the day.
Hence why you're not a programmer, by the way.
Well, yeah, I thought I was pretty good at it at the time, but
Yeah.
this was tighter and, more easily understood than anything I wrote. So the second thing I did is I went back and retrieved off a floppy disk some code I had actually written and asked this AI engine to write that code better. And it did. And that is what convinced me that I had been way better off abandoning that part of my career and doing other things. So.
Well, I think we talked right out of college. I coded for a year, and I just knew that was not my career path either. So You probably were better at it than me, but I remember realizing that you got to play to your strengths, and that was not going to be my strength. No, that's really cool that you did that. Really, really
but
cool.
I think, probably for both of us, the realization that I had at the time, and I'm sure it was for you, is, hey, this software stuff is pretty powerful. And it's going to change the world.
Absolutely.
And I may not be the world's best coder, but this is a technology that I can leverage to do all kinds of things that up till now just haven't been possible.
100%.
And
100%.
That was for me the trigger, just wow.
Yeah. I think we've both been in tech ever since, right? Yeah, no doubt about it. So, all right. So Tony, Intrusion, right? Been growing year over year. Right? If you could hit or exceed your growth targets this year over the next 12 months, if I give you a magic wand to fix one thing to help you get there, what would that be?
For us, it's just awareness. The cybersecurity market is just flooded with all kinds of technologies. There's tremendous amount of funding that goes into advertising and trade shows and all the rest of it. So it's literally just hard to get noticed among the noise that's sort of out there. And so we'll do some, I think, novel things this year to try to punch above our weight to be a little more visible in the marketplace. And I suspect that those investments will pay off, pretty nice.
Well, we got to get you on more of these podcasts because one, you have a phenomenal story to tell. Two, Intrusion is a phenomenal story that is different than everything that we hear in cyber, right? And you play in a very unique place in that, and you're a complement to so many existing things. And I think that that's the missing piece. So anybody watching this, tell them how to get in touch with you. Again, we'll put all the links through, but people that want to do that test that you just talked about with Intrusion, that week test, the 1 week test, how do they do that?
Sure. We're intrusion.com. You can engage with us there. Send me an email, tony.scott@intrusion. I'll connect you with our team, and we're excited to work with anybody who's interested.
Absolutely. You have a very, very unique place in the market, and we're just excited to see you grow. Tony, thank you so much for spending time with us today. You're a delight to talk to, and you have, like I said, just a wealth of knowledge, and I hope to get you back on the data and privacy stuff because it's one of the hottest topics that we do. So I hope to invite you back here pretty shortly.
You got it. No problem. Great to talk to you.
Thanks again, Tony. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And for everybody listening, we will see you on the next episode of Future Proof. Thank you.
If you're ready to embrace change and lead with innovation, be sure to subscribe and never miss an episode. Thanks for tuning in to the Future Proof Podcast.